Hello everyone, Pineapple here with the next Dark Gallifrey line, The War Master, starting with part 1, a story where the War Master doesn't appear. Yeah, so where the last story was a cut and dry narrative that could be listened to as a 3-part story, this one takes more of a standalone approach. Part 1 being a prequel to the main story, Part 2 introducing the Master and other main characters for Part 3. And the main character of this part, Bernie Summerfield, and her doctor leave to set up Part 3 as the War Master's actual story. The first part having great dynamics and ideas, but one massive flaw that's been done in other stories before, but while they try, feels unjustified. We'll talk about the characters later, but this story goes mostly back to front. The final scene of the ending playing, then we jump to the scene before it and let it run its course, and so on and so forth. As I said, this formula has been justified in other stories before, such as in Stranded, but here the justification is moral and a commentary on archaeology. Sure. It's attempting to be creative, but boy, it just makes the whole thing confusing as the story is unraveled in such an unnatural way. It doesn't leave you as satisfied as it could. With that out of the way, why don't we get into the story? The story starts with a cute scene where Benny and the Doctor have no idea whether they're at the start or at the end, you and me both, arguing about it and comparing the story itself to archaeology, much like time travel, starting at the end and learning the story backwards. Like I said before, a nice theme, but in practice, not the best way to tell a story. The opening theme plays after and isn't changed from Morbius. I was hoping each new story might have a little variation on the theme, but as far as I can tell, it's the same. But it works just as well here as it did last time. So now, why don't we talk about our two main characters? First, we have Benny, or Bernie Summerfield, played as ever by Lisa Bowerman. Last seen on the channel in the Ninth Doctor Adventures, or Coda, depending on if that comes out before this video. And the Doctor, the same one we met in Time Lord Immemorial, played by David Warner. An alternate universe Doctor she picked up on her adventures that I haven't heard yet, and that she seemingly brought back to Endspace. They bicker a lot in this, but their friendship is pretty solid. And for what is essentially David Warner's final story due to his untimely passing, I feel here and in next episode they get some great moments together, which is all you can ask for in an actor's final piece, as it's never usually able to be as grand as they deserve. Although I remember my feelings on this story, this first episode was months ago, so I'm going into this pretty fresh, and I hope it's better on the second go around than what I experienced on the first. We jump back to them entering the TARDIS. And don't worry, I'm going to be saying we jump back a lot. Both angry at being used by the other, being chased by a monster, and we learn exactly where they're escaping from. Gallifrey. Or the titular Dark Gallifrey, but to be honest, these three stories aren't exactly clear on the subject. While Morbius feels strange due to its lack of defining Dark Gallifrey, these episodes occasionally try to explain it and end up confusing themselves. Most work out in the end, but it's still kind of unclear whether this Dark Gallifrey is a Gallifrey or the Dark Gallifrey or a little bit of Dark Gallifrey left behind after the main Dark Gallifrey was taken. But you know, just from the sentence I'm kind of sick of saying Dark Gallifrey and we're only in part 1 of 3. The Doctor apologises for using Benny for apparently finding this Dark Gallifrey in the first place. Benny mourning the loss of her discovery, and the Doctor decides to implement protective measures to make sure no one stumbles upon it again. And due to how many more Dark Gallifrey audios there'll be after this, I'm sure it works out. The monster chasing them seems to be following, but when they open the viewfinder, all they see is Gallifrey fading away. We jump back again with some reverse record scratch type sound effects to the monster fighting them, yelling out for freedom. This is the Imbomination, played by Taria Peterside. A group of paradoxes layered on top of each other that seems to have taken a liking to Benny, which the Doctor spends his time insulting, as they once again trap the creature alone on this Gallifrey. Benny tries to reason with it, but it's the epitome of self-destruction. Every avenue it tries to escape just weakening it as the Doctor and Benny bicker some more. They run for the TARDIS and time rewinds again, to the two looking for hiding spots in the Panopticon's side chambers. The Doctor is angry at Benny for apparently using him and his life in some temporal way, and another slightly irritating consequence of the framing style is that their dynamic can get hard to track as they argue. at points using the other, and sometimes they're both mad, sometimes one is, and the other suddenly isn't. I'm sure it would make sense if put in a straight line, and I'm tempted to use my editing software like that, but as it is, it's just a little frustrating.
I needed something vast to store a large amount of temporal paradox energy in.
You use my life as Tupperware.
I thought it was quite clever.
Clever? That's your hubris again. That's like saying Vlad the Impaler was clever for inventing the pointy stick.
Benny apparently did it by draining the Imbomination's paradox powers into the Doctor's multiversal timeline, affecting all Doctors. I'm sure that'll explain away one or two of Moffat's crazy plot points and continuity errors, as the Doctor feels violated, their argument letting the Imbomination find them. Going back again, the Doctor and Benny stabilise on a rumbling bridge. This is where the Doctor learns of Benny's betrayal. Before that, Benny is mad at the Doctor again, just before the bridge, mentioning a lift at the end of it, which is some good later detail, as otherwise I would have assumed they somehow fell. It's not a lot, but I do like how, due to the pacing, little things like that are revealed unconventionally. Much like the bigger moments in a different way, taking advantage of the scene progression rather than becoming more confusing. Benny is mad at the Doctor again as they rush onto the bridge, and he tries to justify his meddling in her life, like she will to him later. A pretty good performance from Lisa early on.
I've got the only TARDIS left on this Gallifrey, so maybe just agree with me.
No, Doctor. What you did was cruel. You played on my...
Hubris?
Don't list people's faults on a high walkway. You played on my pride. I just wanted to make one discovery. Something that people would remember.
As Benny realises the Doctor's protests to finding the planet were manipulations. Jumping back again, Benny is piloting a TARDIS, and in a rare event, it's a model with a voice interface played by Homer Todiwala. And it's quite nervous of what Benny is about to do, warning that Benny will leave him to die as he tries his best to be brave, but is struggling, trying to convince her to go to Birmingham instead. He warns Benny if she follows through, he'll be trapped on Dark Gallifrey, but eventually allows her to go to the Doctor. Back again, the Imbomination starts destroying parts of the Citadel, seemingly in the beginnings of the destruction that we've heard in the past/future. What the hell am I even calling the reverse progression here? Dark Gallifrey Days of Future Past? The statue destroying of old presidents is more symbolic, as the Imbomination seeks to destroy this Gallifrey and raid N-Space, vengeful at Gallifrey. But if the Doctor theorises this wasn't even a Gallifrey to start with. Jesus, that's what I was talking about earlier. I know it's Doctor Who, but I'd like a straight answer every once in a while. The Imbomination wants to leave the same way the Doctor came in, as he quotes Matthew 19:24. The Imbomination somehow connects to Benny, planning to use her as a vessel. But as Benny arrives to save the Doctor, we jump again. Benny in the TARDIS bay is looking for the Doctor, but she hasn't got the right TARDIS. She's back in the talking one, which she takes some time to get her head around. The TARDIS apparently found her falling through her own time stream, picking her up as time demanded it. The TARDIS strangely goes from snarky to frigid, ready to crush himself to nothing in hopes of avoiding the situation. Benny only just managing to convince him to help her before murdering himself. Back again, Benny stands over Ace's dead body. Lovely. Apparently seeing a lot of similar visions, and not just Ace's multiple deaths, which is a canon mindscrew in itself, which I'm told is very alike to the Piskin paradox. And I have to say, with such a small cast for this story, and only 2 real main characters, Lisa can really carry a scene on her own. Of course, with the great words penned by James Goss. Benny tells us the Imbomination is sending her to these tragic points in her timeline to screw with her so she can't get the upper hand. A pretty creative torture method, after a fucking strange reference to the famous for being famous protester Greta Thunberg. The vocal TARDIS making his appearance, ready to disappoint Benny. Back again, we get another great scene with Benny, far before she got used to all the death visions, as she sits, crying, holding on to who we learn in the next time jump is her mother who died, buried in Dalek bombardment. Her desperate scraping interrupted as the Doctor tries to snap her out of the obviously fake vision, causing her to lash out. It's heartbreaking. Especially when the Doctor starts pointing out that the scene is inconsistent, feeding the Imbomination.
You've never offered to bring me back here once.
Because...
Don't give me the long words.
Because it would break your heart and mine. As much as I want it to, time travel doesn't work this way.
Back again, we see the beginning of the vision, as Benny tries to help the younger version of her get to safety, trying to stop herself from blaming herself for her mother's death, her mother having gone back to get a toy, leading to her demise. It's a short scene compared to the last 2, but still very heartbreaking, and well acted. I just wish the beginnings of it felt a little more naturally written. Going back to the Doctor, he's in a council meeting along with the Abomination. He criticises them, still unsure why this Dark Gallifrey exists, and theorising all Gallifreys end in death eventually, and revealing the Abomination's existence as a group of living paradoxes, needing Benny to take on the responsibility as she leaves. The Doctor trying to take her place, but the creature only allows him to talk to Benny, resulting in the vision of him that she shooed away as her mother died. Back again, the Abomination confronts Benny, who just so happens to be floating high in the air, the creature being fed by the disparity between the possible dead Benny and the now alive Benny, playing with her as she can see the Doctor all the way down into the Panopticon and leading into the whole screwing around in a timeline business. Just before the fall, Benny is standing somewhere precarious, right on top of the Citadel's glass dome, unsure of what to do. The desperation and confusion performed well. She's found by the Abomination as the glass starts cracking like thin ice, a hatch just too far away to reach, as a metaphor for the creature apparently. And Benny meets the Doctor, confused as the timelines get even more complicated. Them now realising things aren't happening in a perfect order. They chat for a while, the Doctor eloquent as ever, but angry at Bernice for apparently releasing the paradox being. Back again, Benny does release the Abomination, which is done pretty cleverly. The Abomination butters her up, ready for her to release her from her cell under the Capitol. Put there by the Time Lords, even if they weren't the ones that made it. And even the Abomination isn't sure if this Dark Gallifrey even exists, so if the creature made of confusion and paradoxes doesn't know what's going on, I'm not gonna. Back again, Benny runs into a ghost who's looking for a ghost. Their conversation is fun, and it turns out this guy is the president of this Gallifrey, pointing Benny in the Abomination's direction. Before that, Benny was napping in a library. The Doctor once again makes reference to the pacing, and the books she was reading have gone blank. But she wanders off to see the ghost, and upon asking what she was dreaming about, we jump back to when she was sleeping, imagining she was President Bernice Summerfield Trelunda, which is a great Romana gag, as she weaponizes time torpedoes against her enemies. Going back again, we get very confused as she runs away from the book, and in front of the Panopticon she implores the Time Lords to use the Abomination against Morbius, which is a good reference, but if that's supposed to be something deeper, I'm really not sure what it means, or how/if it relates to the Morbius story. It turns out the book was about Benny, a living book that tries to whisper the ending to her, like many Gallifreyan books apparently do, and she finds the Abomination's key in the book. Meanwhile, the Doctor is feeling off as Benny runs off to the library, and before that, the two both feel off-put as they enter this Gallifrey. As we hear how they arrive, the Doctor's still not helping us realise what this Gallifrey really is, as Bernice is ready for it to make her name in the archaeology sphere. Before they landed, Bernice likens Dark Gallifrey to dark chocolate, which I love to hear, as they theorise this Dark Gallifrey is a manipulative multi-dimensional being. The Doctor makes sure we know there's a hole where they enter Dark Gallifrey, and jumping back yet again, Bernice tells the Doctor that they can find Dark Gallifrey by looking for the absence of it, managing to find what is summed up by the Doctor as a sort of gravitational pull of time into nothing. Jumping back, the Doctor starts telling Benny about Dark Gallifrey for the first time, a vision of the planet that appears here and there, rumours of it in every universe, and he offers to help Benny find it. But as we know, even as he warns her off, he knows they're both going to find it. Jumping back a final time, Benny has some choice words about archaeology, and manages to keep coming upon rumours of Dark Gallifrey, ending the story, which I will admit is not that much of a satisfying ending due to the reverse nature of it. So that was part one, and well, there are interesting ideas, fantastic performances from our leads, but boy, is the framing device just extremely inconvenient. If this were a more grounded story, it wouldn't be bad, but with books that induce hallucinations and a being of pure paradoxes, not to mention the Gallifrey that is a Dark Gallifrey but might not be the Dark Gallifrey, I think it just had too much going on. But if you're coming at this with a different headspace to mine, you might get more out of it than me. But even if I couldn't stand the framing device in this particular story, I do have to commend it for not being out of a lack of creativity. The timeline adds to the whole theme of this part, archaeology. Of course, the age-old, do you touch the old thing that might kill you just for knowledge, but that happens a lot in this universe. But also the relation of how archaeology works, finding the most recent parts first, and the rest after, much like we learn about what happened in the story. It's a clever idea, but I still don't think it worked. The most favourable thing I can call this story is overambitious, as it's clear there is a lot of effort in all angles put in, but unfortunately the final product isn't as groundbreaking as I wished. And of course there's the point to be made that it's a little flawed as the first part of The War Master doesn't feature the titular character. So I'll give The War Master Part 1 by James Goss a 5.5 out of 10. It pains me a little to put it so low, but we have greater things to come in the next 2 parts. Last Time was an interesting and well-performed concept, but failed when put together the way it was structured, and also for lacking the titular character, acting like it should have been some sort of standalone prequel. But we get a much better showing this time, with a more normal structure and fantastic character interaction, not only bringing the War Master into his own story, but also putting him with and against Spike himself, returning as his Torchwood character James Masters as Captain John Hart, who I'm excited to see, not only matched up with our other main characters, but just in general. Always exciting the first time you hear a character jump from the telly to audio, when it's nigh impossible the other way around. So without further ado, let's get into part 2 and perhaps even my favourite of the series of Dark Gallifrey, The War Master. The story starts with a decent previously on, which not many Big Finish series get. But since these are single episodes spread apart by months, it's welcome. And I have to point out that the flashback is in chronological order, not the order of the story, which really helps any of the audience who are too busy being confused to remember what happened. Benny, now working at the Braxiatel University, because I guess the doctor's brother got sick of his collection, welcomes someone into her cat-infested apartment, both real and holographic felines. The student she's invited into her abode is, of course, John Hart, and we flash back to him meeting her after one of her lectures, immediately laying on the charm and discussing her interests over dinner, drinks, and flowers. And he's quite good at it. After some of that Spongoli wine, I might even give him a go if I wasn't so sure he'd try and kill me afterwards. He continues laying it on, so they go downriver, Benny dangerously close to missing a lecture. She discusses this relationship that seems to continue with the university's provost, known only as Provost, who I could immediately tell, judging by the voice, was of course Derek Jacobi as the War Master. And while this isn't my first time hearing him, last seen when I reviewed Masterful years ago, a video I think I may remaster. Sometimes there was a lot of effort put into it, but it probably sounds like shit with my old mic. Anyway, back on topic, I've heard him in Ravenous and The Diary of River Song, and while I'm not sure the character is always used the best, Derek Jacobi is still great in the role. Both when being kindly and silver-tongued, but also terrifying in a way the other masters aren't. He tries to dissuade her from banging John as the master alludes to him taking over the school, and thinks John might be a gold digger for Benny's wealth of knowledge from her travels. False as it may be, the friendship these two show in their little talks are great, and they don't lose their chemistry once the penny drops. Benny's cats take a liking to John as he chases after her cake. Literal cake. Not the modern day euphemism, though there might be a bit of that. Thanks to the Master's doubt, she tests John a little, who doesn't seem to be after her knowledge. So after some strange references to a Doctor Who annual, they get along better as he seems to value the person beneath, not the celebrity. They have a bit of a rough patch that the Master tries to lean in on, trying to monopolise his time with her, but John sees her again, making fun of how she seemed to think he wanted some info from her by taunting her with an unauthorised biography of hers, using his charm to make up with her. For such a clear con, knowing the character, these two, once again, just have great chemistry. Eventually, he makes his move, asking about Dark Gallifrey, his appearance not unnoticed by the Master.
Well, you must do as you please, but I am a little hurt at how you brought this matter to me.
You're hurt?
And then ignored my kindly offered advice.
I'm not ignoring your advice.
You sat eating your lunch together.
And the young man has not even seen a flash of my ankles.
Attempting to sow the seeds of doubt thanks to Dark Gallifrey, but she refuses to tell John anything. A while later, John invites Benny to his room. Ooh la la! John seems to think they're being watched, just so happening to be right outside the Master's office. And in his room, John reveals a red-threaded conspiracy board, which astounds the Professor, filled with evidence relating to Dark Gallifrey. He finds it the same way Benny did, looking for the empty spots instead of chasing the shiny leads. She speaks to the Master again, who, like her, laughs at the board, but at least that means he gets more info himself about the mystery, and continues to try and split them apart. The Master leaves it in Benny's hands, but offers a lot of help, only to be interrupted by John, Their meeting quite fun, but boy do you feel a little threatening undercurrent whenever the boys talk. Transitioning scenes with a guitar string that makes me think Ringo is about to start singing.
I'd like to be under the sea.
John interrupts the Master's scribbling, ready to kill the bastard. But he isn't too worried, already pointing a weapon back, with his classic laser screwdriver sound effect. The two exchange blasts in the small office with enough snark to choke a snake. The office taking more of a beating than either of them. They're ready to keep fighting, but they set the fire alarm off. Stood sulking among the evacuated crowd, but after luring the ex-Time agent away and getting him in a death grip, John gets a weapon off. But it isn't traditional. An injection that will blow the Master up as soon as John dies. He's confused why the Master is even there, but both of them are after Dark Gallifrey, thinking up an alliance, which with these two may be funny, but is never going to work in the long run. John ingratiates himself more by claiming he pulled the Master from the burning wreck. John continues his quest quite amicably, because Benny deserves the best, renting out a hall in the University Museum to make a Bernie Summerfield exhibit, showing off a lot of her finds. It's actually quite charming. Anyway, to make things better, it turns out this exhibit is going to be staying for months, which really makes it for her. But after making it sound like he was going to propose, Jesus, he could have gone a better way than that. He does propose something, but it's instead a joint expedition to Dark Gallifrey. Suffice to say, it does not go over well. Benny bursts into the Master's lecture, emptying his class, to bitch to him about John as he enjoys her floundering.
Oh, God.
It isn't all bad. If no one is in fact murdered, then I'll be seen as quite the persuader. I should come out of it quite well.
Are you enjoying this?
That implies I enjoy other people's suffering.
The Master is happy she's thinking of getting rid of him after his screwing of the pooch, but in a well-built-up scene, he uses her vulnerable state to start chipping away at her psyche to get the secrets of Dark Gallifrey. He gets most of the way there in a scene that feels as sleazy and gross as it should. She fights back enough to buy time for John to come in and rescue her. In his rage, the Master reveals who he is, and is ready to use his TCE against them. John is about to take her to the spaceport, away from the Master, but she plays them both, locking them in and running away to start her escape plan. She takes a moment to hide and eavesdrop as the two murderers run around together and bicker quite deliciously, as John tries to explain to the Master what a cougar is. Benny manages to get away as the two realise they're standing around not getting anywhere fast. The Master even tries using John as a hostage, the two eventually realising she isn't even there. God, with this chemistry, John and the Master could fill a box set. They decide to go on a cat-killing spree, so find Benny in her apartment, packing her cats away. And we find out she named one of them Irving, after Braxiatel himself, which is hilarious. But as the killers break in, she jumps out the window and sends the holographic cats after them on murder mode.
We haven't time for this.
Yeah, but it'll be fun. I fancy a Cruella coat.
She gets to the spaceport, setting up a cat sitter by dumping them on the spaceport workers, and struggling through a time-wasting guard bot. John is detained by a desperate student, so Benny makes it onto her ship as John is distracted. Unfortunately for her, the difficulty before was the Master keeping her long enough to sneak onto the ship. John just managing to get on with them before they take off. Benny begs the Master not to take her back to that hellhole, and after some fun character dialogue between the three of them, summing it up well as
An omnipotent anomaly.
And? Well, I heard it shiny.
They go through a warp, but still need to get into Dark Gallifrey's little pocket dimension, desperately looking for the route the Doctor's TARDIS took to get back in. But it turns out the space is protected by warships, almost blowing them out of the sky as the Master tries to guide the ship through with a nice tense score. John almost ends up kamikazing them, but they eventually made it through, the Master surprised they aren't dead. John is way too happy about it, and Benny dreads what they might find as they approach the capital. Or do we call it the Dark Capital, along with Dark Arcadia and Dark Panopticon? Is there a Dark Matrix? The Master makes a speech about how wrong the planet is without giving us concrete details, while going a little insane. John looking for Time Lord secrets while the Master finds a way in, and starts telling Benny about how he'll kill her, but with a monologue she manages to dig a little deeper as John realises that, even just a little bit, he really doesn't want to kill her. The Master is ghost hunting in the Dark Panopticon, and they don't seem to find much, so he gloats and uses his influence to stop Benny from breathing. And in retaliation, John threatens to activate the bomb in the Master, deactivating it in return for Benny's life, sending her running again. She runs back into the ghost from before and asks him the way to the Tempo Cloisters, whatever they are. And she notices that, for some reason, this time around the Citadel is in tip-top condition. Meanwhile, the Master leads John around as the place starts affecting the killer poorly, while invigorating the Master as John starts getting scared at not taking Benny's warning seriously, as the distortions start breaking down his mind. Benny makes her way to the cloisters, but the ghost disappears as the walls start disappearing, and Benny starts lashing out, only for the Abomination to appear, who apparently rebuilt everything for her benefit, and is attempting to attack and use her again to get out. She's ironically saved by the Master, who is very confused at the way Gallifrey is moving around, throwing John through a loop. John and the Master fight as he swears vengeance, only for the unbound Doctor to appear and whisk Benny away. The Doctor having promised to save Benny should she come back to Dark Gallifrey sometime soon. He asks about the Master and John, but she cares little about saving them, as the two share a great little scene, pretty light-hearted as they go off to the university together to have more adventures. Perhaps in the audio novels range, but never with David Warner again, for real this time. Probably. The Master is salty at the Doctor as he realises they had a plan to use Dark Gallifrey as a trap, leaving whoever was looking for it in the lurch. The Master almost shits his pants as he sees the Abomination, while John gets even more confused as the creature attacks the both of them, hanging the cliff for part 3. So as I alluded to before, this episode may have its faults, like strange scene changing, the story shifting from the campus to Dark Gallifrey to start the next part there, feeling a little disjointed, but this is definitely a perfect storm of great performances and character writing. All three of these main characters have moments with the other characters, and each dynamic is different but equally entertaining. And all three of the performers put a great energy in, making the characters entertaining not only on a comedic angle, and we do get a fair bit of that, but the romance between John and Benny is endearing, and the Master's duplicity works greatly off the other two. The Abomination does nothing except set up the next part, and we don't learn any more about Dark Gallifrey apart from a way to get there. But hey, at least this part has the titular character in it. There's not much else I can praise or dislike beyond what I've already said, but thanks to its focus on these fantastic characters and actors, and I commend whoever had the idea to use these three, it's a very good story, and it makes me excited for part 3, and I hope part 3 doesn't follow the trend of Morbius and be worse, if only by a slim margin. But I don't think it'll rate lower than part 1, so I'll give The War Master part 2 a very fun 9 out of 10. Last episode was quite the doozy. Coming after a disappointing first part, it had great characters, great performance, and a writer who knew how to make their interactions and dynamics interesting and entertaining. While still good, Morbius Part 3 was the worst of its run, and I hope that trend doesn't repeat here, based on how low I had to rate Part 1, but I'm optimistic. So let's hop into Dark Gallifrey, The War Master, Part 3. Once again, we start with a previously on segment, which with these spread releases is always appreciated. Then the story starts proper with John shit scared of the Abomination, as the Master laughs at how much of a mess it is. Perhaps not the appropriate reaction, but pretty funny.
A man made of shadows, a squid made of memories, a jar full of nightmares all at once. Lunacy!
The Master is astounded and attempts to weaponize the creature, but it decides it'd rather feed, the Master tossing John into it as he escapes. John wakes up on a sunny plain met by Benny, who explains that this Dark Gallifrey is all that's left of the original, once many Doctors dealt with it, the whole stain left being the Abomination, and that John is now its latest battery. Well, that may not explain what Dark Gallifrey actually is, but at least it gives us an explanation as to what this Gallifrey is. This Benny is an actualization, a bit out of character, but the remnant of her from her last time here. She tells John to run away from a coming threat as the Master tries to steal a TARDIS, the Abomination following him around and taunting him as what seems to be a small child version of himself. In what is not that very well communicated, but a pretty terrifying idea, the Abomination makes the TARDISes scream, as John is still travelling, but the Abomination takes on a different form and is almost coming on to him? The Master is infuriated at the caricature below him, but comes across one of the more ancient TARDISes coming face to console with the talking TARDIS from before. John is thinking he's gonna get some, but instead the Abomination starts tearing his earlier memories out to see them. Once again, a pretty terrifying idea with an okay execution, but the audio just not really getting the visual across. The Master is still trying to get away, but the TARDIS is resilient, immediately getting on his nerves and analysing him, offending the Time Lord as he tries to sit the adventure out, much to the Master's dismay. John is found after the attack by the War Doctor, and I have to say it's nice to see the War Doctor around in this story. But the cover art, if you look at the details, does give you a hint as to what capacity he's here in. Another illusion like Benny, but he's a little more independent of a memory, guiding and helping John along. Jonathan Carley plays the War Doctor and does pretty well, even if the material is a little iffy due to him being even less real than 4 was in Morbius. But he puts his all into it, adding him well to the cast. The Doctor makes an impassioned monologue about how beautiful the planet used to be, as they see it from the memory they're stuck in. And the Master is told by the TARDIS that he won't leave, but will protect the Master within his walls, letting him live out his natural life to death, and sends him to find the food machine, which doesn't go over well. John wonders about just spending his time as a farmer and explains how he got here. The Doctor, who is revealed to be a memory of the Master's, dismaying at what he calls gossip, and reiterating what the Abomination and its Dark Gallifrey is, making this the second Dark Gallifrey line to not go to Dark Gallifrey. But like I said before, at least now we know what this Gallifrey is. The Doctor points towards the horizon, seeing this memory's version of the Citadel in the distance, although it takes a while for John to notice, and with prodding from the Doctor, he decides to make the trek, and if it goes wrong...
If not, I could come back here and get on with raising aubergines.
Cool.
That too.
The Master is wandering around the TARDIS, making his way to a service hatch, since the console is disabled, so he decides to open it up in an area the TARDIS can't control, an area unknown to TARDISes, but quite important. So while he keeps the TARDIS occupied, he starts burning circuits and deleting rooms. John's made his way near the Citadel with the Doctor, getting quite tired and regaling the Doctor with his previous plan to scrap the planet. But now all he wants to do is go home. But it can't be that easy as his arm starts fading away. Back in the TARDIS, the Master explains he can do this because the TARDISes aren't allowed to eject rooms by themselves to keep the pilot safe. And as the TARDIS loses parts of himself, he calls Uncle and gives in. John is still freaking out about his fading arm, so the Doctor hurries him to the capital. The closer he gets, more parts of him starting to fade. The confusion and shock very well acted by James Masters. The Master is very self-satisfied and decides to send the TARDIS into, quote, the heart of the storm, as the TARDIS does its best Cleveland impression.
We're going into the heart of the storm.
No, 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 no. No, 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 no!
The Doctor and John are feet away from the capital, once again greatly acted. More of him starts fading and the Doctor does well to cheer him to the finish line, while the Master decides to block the entryway to the Abomination's Gallifrey, giving him leverage over the creature. And it's not the most comfortable position for the TARDIS to be in. We switch back to John, and while the cutting back and forth works well in the story, it doesn't really sound good in the review form, does it? A lot of...
And then...
The Doctor continues to push John while the Master waits for the Abomination, but the TARDIS decides to take action, learning from the Master's actions from before, and jettisoning the Master, which is a cool move, but didn't we just learn that the TARDISes can't jettison rooms as a way to keep the pilot safe? That might be a little bit of a plot hole unless I'm misunderstanding it. John starts to accuse the Doctor of doing this to him, but he finally reaches the Citadel, starting to rapidly fade and solidify. And this is a crazy plot twist, as John himself becomes a TARDIS as he touches the glass Citadel dome, astounding both me and the Doctor, and boy, do the noises he makes just sound that little bit wrong.
I'm a bleeding TARDIS!
The Master lands in the middle of the ghostly panopticon we briefly saw in part 1, filled with the bickering Time Lords who are unable to come to a conclusion of what to do with their shadow Gallifrey. The Master has some choice words for them, lecturing them and telling them to stay quiet. Infuriated, they won't use the Abomination as their realm could implode at any second. The Master proclaiming himself as a renegade, attempting to take control, but doesn't get very far as the councillors just want to invite him to debate. The Master reveals he wants to use the Abomination in the Time War, pointing out how rough the Time Lord's transition from glorified bystanders to an army was, him vowing to use the Paradox power to turn them into the warriors they need to be to fight. They seem pretty enthusiastic once he kills their leader, so the Abomination descends to take back control, and pretty easily I might add, turning them into ravaging cannibals ready to feed on his timeline much like she does. John phases out completely and lands in a white void, joined by a pot plant that turns out to be the talking TARDIS, having been turned into one, both temporarily and for an unknown length of time, as a rescue measure thanks to the TARDIS. John has some interesting observations.
Just... do I have a door? How do people get in me?
I've not really... I mean, look, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision.
Look, don't laugh and ask me how I know, but I'm fairly certain there's a swimming pool inside of me. Chlorine.
John is reveling in it, but the TARDIS brings the tone down as it recognises they're both in the Abomination. They start to plan, the TARDIS only now realising who he's dealing with as John flirts with him, which is pretty hilarious. The TARDIS low-key into it, and John promises a date at the end of the universe as he takes off. The Master is just about to be devoured as the Abomination drops his mind in the Dark Tower and asks him to take Rassilon's place, allowing its power to use the Master as a conduit to escape. After a lot of posturing and daydreaming, he decides it's a better fate than eaten, and as he prepares to take over, lying in the tomb, happy to be used in such a destructive plan, with a great use of the Saxon Master's theme, but before it can finish, John lands around him, placing the Master in his rooms, as he had disguised himself as the tomb. The Master is very insistent they leave, so the Abomination can't use them, and eventually John gets over his performance anxiety and moves them away. They land side by side in the death zone, running for their lives, as John has to get used to being more human.
I don't have that much grasp of now anymore. For instance, I look at you and I see how you die, and it's really sad.
Sad?
Also quite funny.
John tries to take off again, landing them back into the Panopticon, and then leaving again as it seems to start crumbling on the other Time Lords. They land by the Doctor as the capital crumbles, but it seems John's run out of TARDIS juice, as the Abomination tears this Gallifrey down to get to them. The Doctor taunts them, explaining that if the Abomination gets them, it'll implode them like it planned to escape. So the Master decides that they should both die for the greater good via the companion grenade. Now that he's a TARDIS, the grenade won't work, and in a last-ditch effort, the Master clings to John, attempting to use him as a meat shield. He survives to have a good scene with this Paradox Doctor, them trapped on a barren asteroid left in this now desolate universe. The Doctor starts fading like everything else, leaving only the two criminals. They stand defeated, and the Master tries to get John to materialise them away. John wary as he's only a TARDIS in this universe, and the trip may kill him, but it's either that or stay together in the nothingness forever. But the rocks around them move, as the Abomination takes its final form, planning to feed on them as a last bid for power. But this technically being the end of the universe means that the TARDIS is ready for their date, leaving the Abomination alone in shock. John is giddy, and the Master is quite defeatist, but the sassy TARDIS has already planned an escape, having befriended Benny and left a backdoor in the trap she made, leaving the Abomination's universe as nothing more than a marble. The Master is dropped back before he tried to kill Benny, back in his role as Provost. She notices he's a little bit older, but disregards her thinking, ready to tell him about her new paramour, John. But the Master is feeling satisfied as he finds the marble in his pockets, ready to rule over it, using it as a paperweight. A nice ending for the character in this adventure as he says goodbye to Benny.
Goodbye, Professor.
See you around, Provost?
Yes. Oh, and well played.
And to finish the story off, John and the TARDIS in human form take a stroll, wondering where they stand, but end up cutely holding hands and deciding to stay together with a rhyme and a snog. So that was part 3 of Dark Gallifrey's The War Master. And it wasn't bad. I didn't like it as much as part 2, but it was certainly a more digestible listen than part 1. On the downsides, there was a lot of confusing technobabble, and moments that, while great and entertaining, like John becoming a TARDIS, aren't as justified or well initiated as I wanted. But we get a proper and satisfying ending, good moments for most characters, and continues this arc's kind of explanations when it comes to Dark Gallifrey's identity. The Abomination and the Gallifrey it made being what was left behind when the Dark Gallifrey was dealt with by the Doctor. Speaking of the Abomination, the only real thing going for it was its connection and torture of Benny. It had a much more fleshed out connection to her than the Master or John, even when both trapped in its warping memory reality. I just wish the antagonist was more fleshed out. But at least this part continues the good performances and writing of both John and the Master. The Master as the main character doesn't feel that justified, honestly. A lot more disappointing than Morbius. But that comes down to his position in the story, not the dialogue or performance. But John got a surprisingly good B-plot, becoming and falling in love with a TARDIS, which, while could have used a little more fleshing out, was a great way to use the character. Him also having a pretty good dynamic with the memory of the War Doctor, pushing him forward to escape the Abomination. And I hope that sometime in the future we see more exploits of John and the Doctor. Or maybe even making use of other Big Finish facets and teaming him up with some sort of similar character like Calypso Jones. So, while not as good as part 2, it certainly was easier to experience than part 1, so I'll give Dark Gallifrey The War Master Part 3 a 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't bad or anything, its failings just aren't completely subverted by its positives, putting it in between the last 2 parts as I thought it would be. Comparing this to Morbius and putting the scores together, that leaves this 3-part story at a 7 out of 10. 1 point under Morbius, which sits at an 8. Both were interesting with great performances, but this story has some fundamental problems, like its focus on Benny and switch to the Master and John, uninteresting villain personality, and a disjointed first part. Whereas in Morbius, the main characters were mostly consistent, and the story worked well in being as congruent as they were. Both are very enjoyable, and the whole of The War Master was very entertaining in writing and acting, so I wish I could rate it higher, but there were a lot of issues. Thank you everybody for watching my review of The War Master Part 3, ending 2024's run of Dark Gallifrey, and I'm excited for what they do next year. Please like the video if you liked it, comment down below if you wish, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, ring the notification bells so that you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.